Hello, good evening. Um, Welcome to GLBT Issues in Literature. My name is Rachel Hansen. If you've never been here before, welcome. Um, I do apologize for running a little late this evening. I know it's only a couple of minutes, but your time is valuable. And I'm really glad that you are here. You might have guessed this. Um, that I was having some technical challenges. Let's see. Hopefully they don't. Hopefully nothing happens. Um, but one thing that is true this evening, it seems, is that I can't see who is joining or any of your comments. So I apologize for that. Um, as ever, I don't usually do this, but my glasses are quite dirty. If you are here to just comment on what a woman on the internet looks like, um, this is not the place for you to do that. So, um, but otherwise, I'm glad that you're here. Um, normally I would say that I welcome your comments, but since I can't see them, like, you're welcome to make them, but I can't see them. So do with that what you will. I don't really know what it is about the spring semester, but for the last several years in a row, the start to the spring semester has felt really difficult for me. Uh, and some of it may be that about this time last year, um, and it's actually tomorrow. Tomorrow is the anniversary of my grandmother's death. So that might be why I'm feeling a little bit heavy this week. It could also just be the state of the world right now. Um, there's just a lot of heavy things that are kind of all going down right now. So I hope if you are also feeling kind of heavy, more in your soul, know that you have company, um, and hopefully things get better for all of us. Uh, Now, this week in our class, we're really staying in childhood and early elementary school. Uh, and very specifically, what we do to copy the adults in our lives. Um, mm, Excuse me. So as I was, doing the reading and I was writing up this module, I was really thinking about the things that we do as children to copy the adults in our lives that are honestly maybe just a little weird. Um, and one of the things that I was thinking about was a phase that I personally went through where the only thing that I was using to modify my descriptors was the word mighty. Um, which I used. Actually, I don't even know, honestly, how long I used this adverb, but until it was a classmate's birthday in my kindergarten class, and we were having cupcakes. Um, because the early 90s was a different time, and you could bring cupcakes to your kid's class for their birthday. Um, and a kid called me out on it. I flat out denied it. I knew I was lying. I denied it anyway, but you know what? It's been very nearly 30 years. I don't think that I've ever used mighty as a way to modify my descriptors ever again. So I feel like sometimes as kids we just do weird things. And it's part of growing up, honestly, more than anything else. Um, and as I was doing this reading and preparing, uh, I was very grateful to read the chapter Honey Child in All Boys Aren't Blue. if only to discover that I'm not the only kid who ever um, kind of just acted like a delightful little weirdo in school. Um, and in the chapter Honey Child, which um, I know the name of the chapter, but I got the number wrong last week, so now I'm pulling my own copy out to check myself. And it's chapter 3 in All Boys Aren't Blue, which just as a reminder, whew, that's what that looks like. Um, but uh, within his child world, George and his friends kind of created this language between them, um, which really, the way that he wrote it in the book definitely evokes something very specific in my own mind. But if I try to replicate that verbally, um, it's just going to be horrible and insulting for everybody. So I'm not going to do that. um, it is quoted in the written piece of this week's module, so you can read what I'm talking about. Uh, but right, like they had this language that uh, was accepted to them as something that just grown folks were supposed to use, um, but that they wanted to pretend that they were grown, and so they talked like the adults in their lives. Um, and as he and his friends are doing this, right, kind of engaging in this activity that I have to believe that he and I aren't the only ones who ever did this. Um, he started calling people honey child, which just, I mean, and as he's describing it, as I'm reading it, like it just seems so delightful and endearing. Um, and unfortunately, that's not how some of the adults in his life perceived uh, this particular little nugget of language, right? Like mine was being called out by a classmate for using the word mighty. George's was, you gotta stop calling people honey child. Um, and that's a piece of language that was just erased from him. He couldn't use it anymore. Um, and now this is probably is just the communities that I live in. I don't hear honey child as a word that is used often, just in my ears. But he reports hearing it all the time. And so it makes him giggle a little bit that something that was again, right, like the late 80s, early 90s was such a threat is now no big deal. Uh, I just think it's really interesting to think about how language evolves, right? Over time. Yeah, I thought I had something else to say on that, and it's just left me. So apparently not. Uh, now, kind of on the opposite side of this coin, right? We have little Audre Lorde, who is also, or maybe it's fairer to say that George is also, because Audrey came first, but whatever. Um, whatever in the flow of time, right? Um, young Audrey is also having a new experience, and that is sharing a room with her sisters instead of with her parents. Um, Now, much like Audrey grew up to be, her sisters were also storytellers. Um, and they would listen to the radio, um, and they would practice telling stories when they went to bed. Um, but maybe more notably, and really makes me feel for the younger siblings out there, um, her sisters would wait until they thought that she was asleep before starting to tell their stories. They didn't want their little sister involved. Um, one night she was doing a bad job of pretending to be asleep. Um, and her sisters were real upset that they couldn't do their storytelling. She begged them to please, please, please tell their story. She's not going to interrupt. Um, but she did because she was little. And she got excited about the story. Uh, Now, her sisters never told stories around her ever again. But the stories didn't necessarily end just because of a girlhood fight in a shared bedroom, right? Um, because she and her sisters would then trudge up Sugar Hills to trade in their old comics at the used comic book shop. Um, Audrey and her sisters loved the comics. Wow, I said comments. I meant to say comics. Whew. Um, this was a great experience for them, and it is unfortunately also where young Audrey learned that men are generally not safe people. Um, because the man who owned the shop would lifted her up at one point so that she could get to the comics that she wanted. Um, but did so in a way that made her feel trapped and a little bit filthy, which is not a way that a child should feel ever. Um, Now, once Audrey caught on to this and kept her distance from the owner, they could still trade in their comics, of course, but they stopped getting kind of a lot of the freebies that they had enjoyed uh, prior to Audrey catching on to kind of this childhood dishonesty, which really one thing that is particularly devastating to me to reflect on is just how much uh, that type of toxic masculinity continues to alienate girls and women from uh, right this type of storytelling, right? Comic storytelling. Um, because right, like we kind of are boxed out, except for a few very specific genres within the larger umbrella of comics, um, which really is a drag, honestly, more than anything. Um, I'm saying a lot. I apologize for that. But as I was, again, thinking and reading, like, what is, right, kind of like the very, like the academic thing, right, that's going to tie all of this together. Um, and I started thinking about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I think that many of us can agree that maybe the United Nations doesn't do quite as much to help as we hoped that they could. Um, but the United Nations is a critically important peacekeeping and policymaking body globally. Um, and in 1989, this groundbreaking convention clearly states, and I quote, that childhood is entitled to special care and assistance. Um, And I think that that's so important for us to be talking about when we talk about um, childhood as the foundation of building the life that you are going to be living as an adult, right? Um, that if you are living in a community and in a culture um, that does make you feel safe, and like you are deserving of special care and assistance. Um, I know that for many, there's a fear that that could lead to overinflated ego and spoiled children. And I guess it could come across that way, honestly. And it could come across that way because when we meet adults who know who they are and know what they need, because they've gotten support, we might not view those adults particularly favorably, right? Especially if that adult is a woman and she knows what she wants, she knows what she needs. Um, but really having your needs met, that's not you being spoiled, right? Um, it's not spoiled to um, get to have food that you want to eat and clothes that you want to wear, and access to a quality education, right? Like none of that is terrible or egotistical. Um, and I say all of this, and I recognize I'm rambling, maybe just a little bit here, um, because talking about the rights of children and the care that they deserve does feel a little bit lonely and hollow to me. Not because I don't believe that children uh, don't deserve special care and assistance, but because the United States is the only United Nations member that has not ratified this convention. Um, so, like, I am living, existing, and parenting in a country that does not believe that children are entitled to special care and assistance. Um, and also because of this, I'm, um, a lot of the journal articles that I have shared, you just hear in the last 4 weeks. Um, it's hard to believe, isn't it? That it's been 4 weeks. Sometimes it feels shorter, sometimes it feels way longer, but um, right because that um, I feel that that approach to childhood. Did I interrupt myself? I did interrupt myself. Um, a lot of the articles that I have shared so far have been from scholars that are based in the United States. Um, and part of that is just volume, right? Like the United States is giant. And we have a lot of post-secondary institutions that churn out and develop some pretty robust and impressive knowledge. In this very specific case, I think that um, where the researcher comes from is really important, and very specifically that that researcher comes from a culture um, that broadly does accept that children need, um, again, special care and assistance. Um, and so I'm turning to Canadian theorist Hannah Dyer, um, because what she talks about is, and I quote, the contemporary residues of historical violence on theories of healthy child development and histories of colonialism and transatlantic slavery, um, and how they extend into the future. End quote. Um, right, because when we think about the norms of children, right, and how they bring that with them into adulthood, it is, I feel, irresponsible and ignorant of us to ignore um, the circumstances and lived experiences that lead to what we would consider to be a healthy child. If we are ignoring colonialism and we're ignoring the impacts that the transatlantic slave trade has had, even hundreds of years after it was abolished, um, we're ignoring the deepest foundations of like, what makes us whole people. And I think that that's irresponsible. Um, Now, as I'm thinking about, again, right, colonialism, the slave trade, um, I want to actually look back to last week when we were talking about Max and where the wild things are. Um, because one thing that I think that the author of Where the Wild Things Are could have done so easily, honestly, considering when that book was written, um, to other the wild things. And that's not what happened. Um, Hannah Dyer, as she is, right, like thinking about and conceptualizing all of these things, that we are then grappling with. Um, she is, amongst other things, she's an interdisciplinary theorist. Um, she is a queer theorist, but specifically talking about children. Um, she doesn't use the word queer to just mean same-sex relationships. Um, she's really using it as a descriptor uh, that, again, and I quote, gestures toward more expansive ways to account for children's deviances from normativity, end quote. Um, so when we're really, when we're thinking about this kind of within the realm of feminist studies, right? Um, we're talking about how we can create this larger and more expansive world that honors us for who we are as individuals rather than as a set of assumptions based on our perceived gender identity. Um, so really, this whole theoretical framework really invites us to consider what we consider to be normal, and why we think of it that way. Um, right, like within the reading for this week, um, why couldn't it have not been acceptable for a young boy to say honey child, or for a young girl to ask to get help with her preferred comics? Um, and then how we can really begin to tie these ideas together into a culture where children, and obviously also adults, um, are more broadly understood to be in need of special care and assistance, to kind of nurture that curiosity and authenticity within us. Um, Now, one thing that I would be really excited, perhaps unfairly so, to see in the comments this week, um, is if you had any weird like language experiments that you had as a child. Um, like honestly, for no other reason than for my own curiosity. Um, but I think that is really, it's a little bit shorter than usual, but that is all that I have for you all this week. Um, Thank you so much for your time. I apologize again for kind of those technical challenges at the beginning, but I will see you in written format next Monday. Um, was looking at a calendar. That's Monday, February 9th. And then I will see you back here in person, hopefully without any technical difficulties, on February 11th. So I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.